But God was not in it, of course, when they stole it. But still it was strange and a great sin over to touch it. He thought of it with deep awe, a terrible and strange sin. It thrilled him to think of it in a silence when the pens scraped lightly. But to drink the alder wine out of the press and be found out by the smell was a sin too. But it was not terrible and strange. It only made you feel a little sickish on account of the smell of wine. Because on the day when he had made his first Holy Communion in the chapel, he had shut his eyes and opened his mouth and put on his tongue a little. And when the rector had stopped down to give him the Holy Communion, he had smelt a faint winey smell of the rector's breath after the wine of the Mass. The word was beautiful. Wine. It made you think of a dark purple because the grapes were dark purple that grew in a Greece outside houses like wild temples. But the faint smell of the rector's breath had made him feel a sick feeling on the morning of his communion. The day of your first communion was the happiest day of your life. And once a lot of generals had asked Napoleon what was the happiest day of his life. They thought he would say the day he won some great battle or the day he was made an emperor. But he said, "Gentlemen, the happiest day of my life was the day on which I made my first communion." Father Arnold came in and the Latin lesson began, and he remained still leaning on the desk with his arms folded. Father Arnold gave out the theme books and he said that they were scandalous and that they were all to be written out again with the correction at once. But the worst of all was flaming them because the pages were stuck together by a blot. And Father Arnold held it up by a corner and said it was an insult to any master to send him up such a theme. Then he asked Jack Lofton to decline the noun mare, and Jack Lofton stepped the ablative singular and could not go on with the plural. "You should be ashamed of yourself," said Father Arnold sternly. "You, the leader of a class." Then he asked the next boy and the next and the next. Nobody knew. Father Arnold became very quiet, more and more quiet as each boy tried to answer it and could not. But his face was black looking and his eyes were staring too. His voice was so quiet. Then he asked Fleming, and Fleming said that the word had no plural. Father Arnold suddenly shut the book and shouted at him, "Kneel out there in the middle of the class. You are one of the idlest boys I ever met. Copy out your themes again, the rest of you." Fleming moved heavily out of his place and knelt between the two last benches. The other boys bent over their themes book and began to write. A silence filled the classroom and Stephen, glancing timidly at Father Arnold's dark face, saw that it was a little red from the wax he was in. Was that a sin for Father Arnold to be in wax, or was he allowed to get into the wax when the boys were idle because that made them study better, or was he only letting on to be in wax? It was because he was allowed, because purists would know what a sin was and would not do it. But if he did it one time by mistake, what would he do to go to a confession? Perhaps he would go to confession to the minister, and if the minister did it, he would go to the rector, and the rector to be provincial, and the provincial to be general of the jesuits. That was called the order. And he had heard his father say that they were all clever men. They could all have become high up people in a world if they had not become Jesuits. And he wondered what Father Arnold and Paddy Barrett would have become, and what Mr. McGlade and Mr. Gleason would have become if they had not become Jesuits. It was hard to think what, because you would have to think of them in a different way, with a different colored coats and trousers, and with a beard and mustache and a different kind of hats. The door opened quietly and closed. A quiet whisper ran through the class. The prefect of studies. There was an instant, a dead silence, and then the loud crack of penny bat on the last desk. Stephen Hurst leaped up in a fear. Any boys want flogging here, Father Arnold? Cried the prefect of studies. Any lazy idle loafers that want flogging in this class? He came to the middle of the class and saw Fleming on his knees. "Who?" he cried. "Who is this boy? Why is he on knees? What's your name, boy?" "Fleming, sir." "Who, Fleming? An idol, of course. I can see it in your eye. Why is he on his knees, Father Arnold?" "He wrote a bad Latin term," Father Arnold said, "and he missed all the question in a grammar." "Of course he did," cried the prefect of studies. "Of course he did, a born idler. I can see it in a corner of his eye." He banged his pandybat down on a desk and cried, "Up, Fleming! Up, my boy!" Fleming stood up slowly. "Hold up!" cried the prefect of studies. Fleming held out his hand. The pandybat came down on it with a loud smacking sound. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Other hand. The pandybat came down again in 6 loud quick smacks. "Kneel down!" cried the prefect of studies. Fleming knelt down, squeezing his hand under his armpits, his face contorted with the pain. But Stephen knew how hard his hands were, because Fleming was always rubbing rosin into them. But perhaps he was in a great pain, for the noise of the pandybat was treble. Stephen Hurt was beating and fluttering. "At your work, all of you!" shouted the prefect of studies. "We want no lazy idle loafers here. Lazy idle little schemers," At your work, I tell you. Father Dolan will be in to see you every day. Father Dolan will be in tomorrow. He poked one of the boys in the side with the pandy bat, saying, You boy, when will Father Dolan be in again? Tomorrow, sir, said Tom Furlong's voice. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, said the prefect of studies. Make up your minds for that. Every day Father Dolan right away. You boy, who are you? Stephen's heart jumped suddenly. Deadless, sir. Why are you not writing like the others? He could not speak with fright. Why is he not frying, Father Arnold? He broke his glasses, said Father Arnold, and I examined his from work. Broke? What is this I hear? What is this? Your name is, said the prefect of studies. Deadless, sir. Out here, Deadless, lazy little schemers. I see a skimmer in your face. Where did you break your glasses? Stephen stumbled into the middle of the class, blinded by fear and haste. Where did you break your glasses? Repeated the prefect of studies. The cinder pad, sir. Hoo, the cinder pad, cried the prefect of studies. I know that trick. Stephen lifted his eyes in a wonder and saw for a moment Father Dolan's white-grey, not young face. His baldy white-grey head with fluff and the sides of it. The steel rims of his spectacles and his snow-colored eyes looking through the glasses. Why did he say he knew that trick? Lazy, idle little laugher, cried the prefect of studies. Broke my glasses. An old schoolboy trick. Out with your hands this moment. Stephen closed his eyes and held out in the air his trembling hand with the palm upward. He felt the prefect of studies touch it for a moment at the fingers to straighten it, and then the swish of the sleeve of the sultan. As the pandy bat was lifted to strike, a hot burning, stinging, tingling blow like the loud crack of the broken stick made his trembling hand crumple together like a leaf in a fire. And at the sound and the pain scalding, tears were driven into his eyes. His whole body was shaking with fright. His arm was shaking, and his crumpled, burning left hand shook like a loose leaf in the air. A cry sprang to his lips, a prayer to be let off. But though the tears scalded his eyes and his limbs quivered with pain and fright, he held back the hot tears and the cry that scalded his throat. Other hand, shouted the prefect of studies. Stephen drew back his maimed and quivering right arm and held out his left hand. The soothing sleeve swished again as the panty bat was lifted, and a loud crashing sound and fierce, maddening, tingling, burning pain made his hand shrink together with the palms and fingers in a livid, quivering mass. The scalding water burst forth from his eyes and burning with the shame and agony and fear. He drew back his shaking arm in a terror and burst out into the whine of pain. His body shook with palsy of fright, and in a shame and a rage he felt the scalding cry come from his throat, and his scalding tears falling out of his eyes and down his flaming cheeks. "Kneel down!" cried the prefect of studies. Stephen knelt down quickly, pressing his bitten hands to his sides. To think of them bitten and swollen with the pain all in a moment made him feel so sorry for them, as if they were not his own but someone else that he felt sorry for. And as he knelt, calming the last sob in his throat and feeling the burning, tingling pain pressed in to his sides, he thought of the hands which he had held out in the air with the palms up, and of the firm touch of the prefect of studies when he had steadied the shaking fingers, and of the bitten, swollen, reddened mass of palm and fingers that shook helplessly in a fire. "Get at your work, all of you!" cried the prefect of studies from the door. "Father Dolan will be in every day to see if any boy, any lazy idle, little loafer wants flogging. Every day. Every day." The door closed behind him. The hushed class continued to copy of the Thames. Father Arnold rose from his seat and went among them, helping the boys with gentle words and telling them the mistakes they had made. His voice was very gentle and soft. Then he returned to his seat and said to Fleming and Stephen, "You may return to your places, you two." Fleming and Stephen rose and walking to their seats, sat down. Stephen, scarlet with shame, opened a book quickly with one weak hand and bent down upon it, his face close to the page. It was unfair and cruel because the doctor had told him not to read without glasses, and he had written home to his father that morning to send him a new pair. And Father Arnold had said that he need not study till the new glasses came. Then to be called a schemer before the class, and to be pended when he always got the card for first or second and was the leader of the Yorkists. How could the prefect of studies know that it was a trick? He felt the touch of the prefect's finger as they had steadied his hand, and at first he had thought he was going to shake hands with him because of the fingers were soft and firm. But then, in an instant, he had heard the swish of the soutane sleeve and a crash. It was cruel and unfair to make him kneel in the middle of the class then. And Father Arnold had told them both that they might return to their places without making any difference between them. He listened to Father Arnold's low and gentle voice as he corrected the themes. Perhaps he was sorry now and wanted to be decent, but it was unfair and cruel. The prefect of studies was a priest, but that was cruel and unfair. And his white-gray face and no colored eyes behind the steel-rimmed spectacles were cruel-looking because he had steadied the hand first with his firm, soft fingers, and that was to hit it better and louder. It's stinking mean thing. That was what it is, said Fleming, the corridor as the classes were passing out in file to the refectory to pandy a fellow for what is not his fault. You really broke your glasses by accident, didn't you? Nasty Roach asked. Stephen felt his heart filled by Fleming's words and did not answer. Of course he did, said Fleming. I wouldn't stand it. I go up and tell the rector on him. Yes, said Cecil Tender eagerly. And I saw him lift the pandy bat over his shoulder, and he is not allowed to do that. Did they hurt much? Nasty Roach asked. Very much, Stephen said. I wouldn't stand it. Fleming repeated. From Baldy Head or any other Baldy Head. It's stinking mean low trick. That's what it is. I'd go straight up to the rector and tell him about it after dinner. Yes, do. Yes, do, said Cecil Tender. Yes, do, yes, go up and tell the rector on him deadless, said Nasty Roach. Because he said that he'd come in tomorrow again and pandy you. Yes, yes. Tell the rector, all said. And there were some fellow out of the second of the grammar listening, and one of them said, the Senate and the Roman people declared the deadless had been wrongly punished. It was wrong. It was unfair. And as he sat in a refectory, he suffered time after time in a memory the same humiliation until he began to wonder whether it might not really be that there was something in his face which made him look like a schemer, and he wished he had a little mirror to see. But there could not be. And it was unjust and unfair. He could not eat the blackish fish fritters they got on Wednesday in Lent, and one of his potatoes had the mark of the spade in it. Yes, he would do what the fellow had told him. He would go up and tell the rector that he had been wrongly punished. A thing like that had been done before by somebody in history, by some great person whose head was in the books of the history. And the rector would declare that he had been wrongly punished because the Senate and the Roman people always declared that the man who did that had been wrongly punished. Those were the great men whose names were in Richmond Magnell question. His story was all about those men and what they did, and that was what Peter Parley tales about the Greece and Rome were all about. Peter Parley himself was on the first page in a picture. There was a road over a height with grass at the side and a little bush. And Peter Parley had a broad hat like a Protestant minister and a big stick, and he was walking fast along the road to Greece and Rome. It was easy what he had to do. All he had to do was, when the dinner was over and he came out in his turn, to go on walking, but not out to the corridor, but up to the staircase on a right that led to the castle. He had nothing to do but that to turn to the right and walk fast up the staircase, and in half a minute he would be in a low, dark, narrow corridor that led through the castle to the rector's room. And every fellow had said that it was unfair. Even the fellow out of the second of grammar who had said that about the Senate and the Roman people. What would happen? He heard the fellow of a higher line stand up at the top of the refectory and heard the steps as they came down to the mating. Paddy Rat and Jimmy Maggie and the Spaniard and the Portuguese, and the fifth was a big Horgan who was going to be flogged by Mr. Gleason. That was why the prefect of studies had called him a schemer and pounded him for nothing, and straining his weak eyes, tired with the thirst. He watched big Corrigan, broad shoulders, and a big hanging back head passing in a file. But he had done something, and beside Mr. Gleason would not flog him hard. And he remembered how big Corrigan looked in the bath. He had skin the same color as a turf-colored bog water in a shallow end of the bath, and when he walked along to the sides his feet slapped loudly on the wet tiles, and at every step his thigh shook a little because he was fat. The refectory was half empty, and the fellows were still passing out in file. He could go up the staircase because there was never a priest or a prefect outside the refectory door. But he could not go. The refector would side with the prefect of studies and think it was a schoolboy trick. And then the prefect of studies would come in every day the same. Only it would be worse because he would be dreadfully waxy at any fellow going up to the rector about him. The fellow had told him to go, but they would not go themselves. They had forgotten all about it. No, it was best to forget all about it, and perhaps the prefect of studies had only said he would come in. No, it was best to hide out of the way, because when you were small and young, you could often escape that way. The fellow at his table stood up. He stood up and passed out among them in a file. He had to decide. He was coming near the door. If he went on with the fellow, he could never go up to the rector because he could not leave the playground for that. And if he went and was panded, all the same, all the fellows would make fun and talk about the young deathless going up to the rector to tell on the prefect of studies. He was walking down along the matting and he saw the door before him. It was impossible. He could not. He thought of the baldy head of the prefect of studies with the cruel, no-colored eyes looking at him, and he heard the voice of the prefect of studies asking him twice what his name was. Why could he not remember the name when he was told the first time? Was he not listening the first time, or was it to make fun out of name? The great man in a history had names like that, and nobody made fun of them. It was his own name that he should have made fun of it. He wanted to make fun. Dolan. It was like the name of a woman who washed clothes. He had reached the door and turning quickly up to the right, walked up to the stairs, and before he could make up his mind to come back, he had entered the low, dark, narrow corridor that led to the castle. As he crossed the threshold of the door of the corridor, he saw, without turning his head to look, that all the fellows were looking after him as they went filing by. He passed along the narrow, dark corridor, passing little doors that were the doors of the rooms of the community. He peered in front of him and right and left through the gloom and thought that those must be portraits. It was dark and silent, and his eyes were weak and tired with tears so that he could not see. But he thought they were the portraits of the saint and a great man of the order who were looking down on him silently as he passed. Saint Ignatius Loyola holding an open a book and pointing to the words Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam in it. Saint Francis Xavier pointing to his chest. Lorenzo Ricci with his beretta on his head like one of the prefect of the lines. The three patrons of Holy Youth, Saint Stanislaus Kostka, Saint Aloysius Gonazda, and Blessed John Birchmans, all with young faces because they died when they were young. And Father Peter Kenny sitting in a chair wrapped in a big cloak. He came out on a landing above the entrance hall and looked about him. That was where Hamilton Rowan had passed, and the marks of the soldiers' slugs were there. And it was that the old servants had seen the ghost in a white cloak of the marshal. An old servant was sweeping at the end of the landing. He asked him where was the rector's room, and the old servants pointed to the door at the far end and looked after him as he went on to it and knocked. There was no answer. He knocked again more loudly, and his heart jumped when he heard a muffled voice said, "Come in." He turned the handle and opened the door and fumbled for the hands of the green baize door inside. He found it and pushed it open and went in. He saw the rector sitting at the desk writing. There was a skull on a desk and a strange solemn smell in a room like the old leather of chairs. His heart was beating fast on account of the solemn place he was in and the silence of the room. And he looked at the skull and at the rector's kind-looking face. "Well, my little man," said the rector. "What is it?" Stephen swallowed down and thing in his throat and said, "I broke my glasses, sir." The rector opened his mouth and said, "Oh." Then he smiled and said, "Well, if we broke our glasses, we must write home for a new pair." "I wrote home, sir," said Stephen. "And Father Arnold said I'm not to study till they come." "Quite right," said the rector. Stephen swallowed down the thing again and tried to keep his legs and his voice from shaking. "But, sir—" "Yes?" "Father Dolan came in today and pandied me because I was not writing my theme." The rector looked at him in silence, and he could feel the blood rising to his face and the tears about to rise to his eyes. The rector said, "Your name is Deadless, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." "And where did you break your glasses?" "On a cinder path, sir. A fellow was coming out of the bicycle house, and I fell, and they got broken. I don't know the fellow's name." The rector looked at him again in silence. Then he smiled and said, "Oh, well, it was a mistake. I'm sure Father Dolan did not know. But I told him I broke them, sir, and he pandied me." "Did you tell him that you had written home for a new pair?" the rector asked. "No, sir." "Oh, well then," said the rector. Father Dolan did not understand. "You can say that I excuse you from your lessons for a few days," Stephen said quickly for fear his trembling would prevent him. "Yes, sir, but Father Dolan said he will come in tomorrow to pound me again for it." "Very well," the rector said. "It is a mistake, and I shall speak to Father Dolan myself. Will that do now?" Stephen felt the tears wetting his eyes and murmured, "Oh, yes, sir, thanks." The rector held his hand across the side of the desk where the skull was, and Stephen, placing his hand in it for a moment, felt a cool moist palm. "Good day now," said the rector, withdrawing his hand and bowing. "Good day, sir," said Stephen. He bowed and walked quietly out of the room, closing the doors carefully and slowly. But when he had passed the old servants on the landing and was again in a low, narrow, dark corridor, he began to walk faster and faster. Faster and faster he hurried on through the gloom excitedly. He bumped his elbow against the door at the end and hurried down the staircase. Walked quickly through the 2 corridors and out into the air. He could hear the cries of the fellows on the playgrounds. He broke into the run and running quicker and quicker. Ran across the cinder path and reached the 3rd line playground. Panting. The fellows had seen him running. They closed round him in a ring, pushing one against another to her. Tell us, why did he say? Did you go in? What did he say? Tell us, Stephen. He told them what he had said and what the rector had said, and when he had told them, all the fellows flung their caps spinning up into the air and cried, "Hurrah!" They caught their caps and sent them up again, spinning skying high, and cried again, "Hurrah! Hurrah!" They made a crowd of their locked hands and hoisted him up among them and carried him along till he struck to get free. And when he had escaped from them, they broke away in all directions, flinging their caps again into the air and whistling as they went spinning up and crying, "Hurrah!" And they gave 3 crowns for Baldyhead Dowlan and 3 chairs for Conmee, and they said he was the decentest rector that was ever in Clongowes. The chairs died away in a soft grey air. He was alone. He was happy and free, but he would not be anyway proud with Father Dowlan. He would be very quiet and obedient, and he wished that he could do something kind for him to show him that he was not proud. The air was soft and grey and mild, and evening was coming. There was the smell of evening in the air, the smell of fields in a country where they digged up turnips to peel them and eat them when they went out for a walk to Major Barton's. The smell there was in a little wood beyond the pavilion where the gallnuts were. The fellows were practicing long shies and bowling lobs and slow twisters. In a soft grey silence he could hear the bump of the balls, and from here and from there through the quiet air the sound of the cricket bats. Pick, pack, poke, like drops of the water in fountain falling softly in a brimming bowl. This video is for Navid Daria's page.